I was 17 years old when I first understood that in my family, love wasn't free. It didn't come with loyalty or care or kindness. In my family, love had a price tag, and that price was whatever I could do for them. It was a humid August morning, the kind of sticky heat that made the air feel heavy. I was lying in bed, half awake, when the door to my room flew open. My mother stormed in, holding a stack of papers in one hand and a calculator in the other. Her eyes had that familiar mix of fake sweetness and sharp impatience. "Alyssa," she said, her voice syrupy and forced. "Your sister just found her dream apartment. She just needs a cosigner." "That'll be you." I sat up slowly, blinking at her. "What? I'm 17. From the hallway, I heard my father chuckle. "Exactly. She has no debt, clean credit. Banks love that. Perfect candidate." They spoke about me like I wasn't even in the room, like I was a tool they'd found in the garage, useful for their project. I tried to process it. What if she doesn't pay the rent? What happens to me then? The fake smile on Mom's face snapped into a scowl. "Don't be dramatic, Alyssa. This isn't about her paying. This is about family. She's your sister. You help family." But the truth burst out before I could stop myself. She already maxed out 3 credit cards in my name. My voice trembled, but I needed them to hear it. That was when the mask came off completely. My father stormed into my room, face red, veins bulging in his neck. "You ungrateful brat," he roared. "We feed you, clothe you, and you dare to act like a victim? After everything we've done for you?" I swallowed hard. My heart pounded, but my voice came out quiet and steady. "Who raised me?" "You did," I whispered to myself, and then louder, looking at them both. "But that doesn't mean I'll ruin my life for her." The silence that followed felt like a thunderstorm. My mother's face twisted with rage. My father clenched his fists. In that moment, something shifted. I had always obeyed, always bent under their rules, always given in when they shouted. But this time, I hadn't. And they weren't going to forgive me for it. That single sentence, "I won't ruin my life for her," changed everything. By nightfall, my suitcase was sitting on the porch. My parents didn't yell this time. They didn't beg. They didn't even say goodbye. They just left a voicemail on my phone after I went inside to grab my last things. "If you're too good for us, don't come back." I remember standing there in the fading summer light, suitcase handle gripped so tight my knuckles turned white. I was 17 years old with no plan, no money, and nowhere to go. But I knew one thing. I was free from them, even if that freedom came with a high cost. For the first 2 weeks, I slept in my friend Brianna's garage. It was dark, damp, and smelled of gasoline. There was no bathroom, just a cracked air mattress and a space heater that barely worked. I would lie awake at night listening to the hum of the heater, my body shivering, my stomach growling. But even in that broken space, I felt something I had never felt at home: peace. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't afraid of the next explosion, the next demand, the next guilt trip. I was on my own, and though it was terrifying, it was also liberating. That night, as I lay in the garage staring at the shadowy ceiling, I made a promise to myself. I will not become what they say I'll be. I will not fail. I will build something so strong, so unshakable, that they will never be able to break me again. I didn't know how I'd do it, but I knew I would. The first 2 weeks after I left home were a blur of exhaustion and fear. Brianna, my best friend since middle school, had offered me the only space she could, her parents' garage. It wasn't a bedroom, or even a safe space. It smelled like oil, old boxes, and gasoline. There was a cracked air mattress in the corner, and a space heater that sputtered more than it warmed. I remember lying awake at night, staring at the garage ceiling beams, listening to the sound of crickets and cars passing outside. The fear was always there. Fear that her parents would get tired of me being around. Fear that I wouldn't make enough money to feed myself. Fear that maybe my parents were right, and I really was ungrateful. But then I'd remember my father's words. "We feed you, clothe you, and now you act like a victim." And I'd whisper to myself in the dark, "I'll prove them wrong." During the day, I went to community college classes. It wasn't glamorous. I couldn't afford campus housing or even a real dorm experience, but the classroom was a kind of sanctuary. For those few hours, I wasn't the girl who got kicked out. I was just Alyssa, a student taking notes, raising my hand, answering questions. At night, I worked at a diner off the highway. The uniform smelled like grease no matter how much I washed it, and my shoes were always sticky from spilled soda and syrup. My shift usually ended around 1 a.m., by which time my back ached from carrying trays and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. But every tip, every dollar mattered. I'd pocket crumpled singles and loose change, sometimes adding up to less than $30 a night. On good weekends, maybe 70. I stretched every penny. Ramen noodles, discount bread, a jar of peanut butter that lasted weeks. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I refused to ask for help. My parents had made it clear that I was on my own, and I was determined to prove them wrong. When I filled out scholarship applications, I wrote until my hand cramped. I told stories of resilience and hardship, of studying in a freezing garage by the light of a space heater. And slowly, The rejections turned into acceptances. Small scholarships at first, $500 here, $1,000 there. Enough to cover textbooks, enough to keep me moving forward. Meanwhile, my sister filled her social media with rooftop bar selfies and vacation photos. She smiled into cameras with expensive cocktails in her hand, her life a parade of glitter and indulgence. Each post was like a knife but also fuel. Every filtered smile reminded me of the night I stood on the porch with my suitcase, told I was too good for them. And I promised myself again, they may have chosen her comfort over my survival, but I will never let that define me. There were nights when I almost broke. Nights when the exhaustion pressed so heavily on my chest I thought I might stop breathing. Nights when my stomach growled louder than my thoughts because I had skipped meals to save money. Nights when I cried into my pillow, muffling the sound so Brianna's parents wouldn't hear. But even on those nights, I remembered something important. In the garage, with nothing but an old space heater, I was still freer than I had ever been in my parents' house. I didn't have to sign papers I didn't understand. I didn't have to take blame for debts I didn't create. I didn't have to live in fear of when the next demand would come. Freedom, even with hunger and exhaustion, was worth more than comfort chained to their control. Step by step, I kept moving. I worked double shifts whenever the diner allowed it. I tutored classmates for a few extra dollars. I skipped parties and Friday nights out, choosing instead to study in the corner of the library until it closed. Some people pitied me. Others called me cold or obsessed, but I knew the truth. Survival wasn't optional. Success wasn't just a dream. It was a lifeline. Every test I passed, every essay I wrote, every scholarship I earned was proof that I could build something on my own. Proof that my parents' words, that I was selfish, ungrateful, destined to fail, were lies. By the end of that first year, I wasn't just surviving. I was building. One night, as I walked home from the diner with tired feet and aching muscles, I looked up at the stars, and I whispered the same words I had promised myself on that first night in Brianna's garage. I will not become what they say I'll be. I will not fail. And for the first time, I believed it. The second year after leaving home was the hardest. The shock of being kicked out had worn off, but the weight of survival pressed heavier every day. My life became a schedule carved down to the minute. Classes in the morning, tutoring sessions in the afternoon, diner shifts at night, homework squeezed into any spare moment. I barely slept. 4 hours a night if I was lucky, sometimes less. Coffee became my lifeline, the cheap gas station kind that tasted like burnt tar, but kept me awake enough to write essays at 2 a.m. But even in that exhaustion, there was a kind of power. Every page of notes, every late-night study session, every passing grade was proof that I was carving a new life out of the ashes of the old one. Scholarships were my oxygen. I applied to every single one I could find. Local, regional, national. I wrote essays until my hand cramped, pouring my story into every application. I wrote about resilience, about studying in a freezing garage, about working shifts until dawn. The rejection letters came fast at first. Thin envelopes, short emails. We regret to inform you, but I refused to stop. For every no, I sent out 3 more applications, and then the yeses started coming. Small amounts at first. $500, $1,000, just enough to cover textbooks or a semester's worth of bus fare. But to me, those checks weren't just money. They were validation. Proof that someone believed I was worth investing in, even if my own parents didn't. Meanwhile, my sister's life seemed like a cruel mirror of mine. While I ate peanut butter sandwiches and skipped meals, she posted photos of champagne glasses, luxury shopping bags, and rooftop pools. The captions read, "Family is everything." Every time I saw those words, my chest tightened. Family. What a beautiful word in theory. What an ugly one in practice. At least in mine. She had their love, their support, their money, and I had nothing. But what I began to realize was that maybe nothing was better than the kind of something they gave. There were moments when doubt gnawed at me, when the exhaustion felt endless, when I saw classmates whose parents paid their tuition, who lived in dorms, who went to parties on weekends while I scrubbed tables at the diner. Sometimes I wondered if my parents were right, if I was being selfish, ungrateful, impossible to love. But then I'd remember the night I stood on the porch with my suitcase, their voices cold through the voicemail. "If you're too good for us, don't come back." And I would whisper back to that memory, "Watch me. Watch me prove you wrong." Slowly my grades began to rise. I wasn't just passing, I was excelling. Straight A's in subjects I once thought were impossible. Professors started noticing me. A few even pulled me aside to ask how I managed so much while working full-time. I didn't tell them the full truth. That my fuel wasn't just coffee and desperation. It was rage. It was the fire of being abandoned, of being told I wasn't enough, of knowing that my family had written me off while I was still a teenager. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to make their words meaningless. By the time I was 19, I had secured enough scholarships to cover most of my tuition. I still worked at the diner, but now every shift felt less like survival and more like strategy. Every dollar went into a savings account I rarely touched. I didn't spend money on new clothes, or nights out, or even birthdays. My treat was sometimes a library coffee or a bus ticket to the city for a free museum day. But with every sacrifice, I could feel myself building something stronger than comfort. I was building independence. My parents didn't call. My sister never texted. It was like I had been erased from the family tree. And yet, in some twisted way, their silence was fuel too. They had bet against me. And every exam I aced, every scholarship I won, every class I passed with honors, was me collecting interest on their doubt. I will never forget the day I received a letter in the mail with the words, "Congratulations, you have been awarded a full transfer scholarship to a top university." I sat on the floor of Brianna's garage, the same place I had cried myself to sleep so many nights, and I laughed until tears ran down my face, because in that moment, I realized something important. They had thrown me out to keep my sister comfortable, and in doing so, they had set me free. 4 years passed before I saw my parents again. By then, I had fought my way through community college and earned a full-ride transfer to a top university. My life was still hard, balancing classes, tutoring, and waitressing, but I had built momentum. I was moving forward. It happened on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. I was working a double shift at the diner to cover rent and books when the doorbell above the entrance jingled. I glanced up, tired but alert, and froze. My mother walked in, pearls around her neck like it was still Sunday Mass. My father followed, chest puffed, carrying himself with that same arrogant confidence, as though nothing had ever happened. For a split second, my stomach flipped. A part of me, the little girl who once begged for their approval, wanted to believe they had come to make amends. Maybe they were here to say they regretted throwing me out. Maybe they had realized their mistake, but the look in their eyes told me otherwise. "Alyssa," my mother said, her voice unnaturally light, almost mocking. "We knew you'd end up somewhere like this." The words stung more than I wanted them to. To her, me working at a diner wasn't resilience. It was proof that I was still beneath her. They didn't sit down. They didn't order food. Instead, my father reached into his coat pocket and handed me an envelope. I frowned, sliding it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a neatly folded letter, typed and signed. A request. They wanted $22,000. "For your sister," my mother explained with a sweet smile. "She just leased a Mercedes. You owe it to her. You walked away when she needed you." I felt the air leave my lungs. My hands clenched the letter so tightly it crumpled. "I was homeless," I said quietly. My father leaned in, his breath heavy with coffee. "Well, you look like you're doing okay now." Something snapped inside me in that moment. 4 years of silence. 4 years of scraping pennies together while they ignored me. 4 years of watching my sister flaunt her comfort while I ate peanut butter sandwiches. And now, suddenly they appeared, not to check if I was alive, not to ask forgiveness, but to demand money for a luxury car I couldn't even dream of sitting in. I folded the letter back into the envelope and placed it on the counter between us. "No," I said simply. My mother's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated louder this time. "I don't owe her anything. I don't owe you anything." The mask slipped from both their faces instantly. My father's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed. My mother's expression hardened into disgust. "You ungrateful child," she hissed. "After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us? By refusing your own family?" I looked her dead in the eye. Family doesn't throw their daughter out at 17 with a suitcase and a voicemail. Family doesn't erase me for 4 years, then show up demanding a down payment for a Mercedes. Her mouth opened, but no words came. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "You made your choice. You chose her comfort over my survival, and I made mine. I will never sacrifice myself for you again." They didn't clap back with more insults, at least not then. My father muttered something under his breath about me being selfish, about me thinking I was better than them. My mother gave me one last look of disappointment, the same look she had used my whole life to control me, and then they left. The bell above the diner door jingled again, and just like that, they were gone. I stood frozen for a long moment, the envelope still sitting on the counter. Customers kept eating their burgers and fries as if nothing had happened, but everything inside me had shifted. That night, walking home from my shift, I made a vow. They would never benefit from a single cent I earned. Not from my scholarships. Not from my jobs. Not from my future. I would put myself through school. I would work until my hands ached and my back gave out. I would build something with nothing. And one day, when I stood tall in the life I created, they would finally understand the truth. The daughter they had discarded wasn't broken. She was unstoppable. After the diner confrontation, something inside me hardened. My parents' demand for $22,000 wasn't just insulting. It was clarifying. It reminded me of the vow I had made. They would never touch a cent of what I earned. Every dollar would go into building a life so far removed from theirs that they wouldn't even recognize me. So, I doubled down. The internship that changed everything. During my 3rd year at university, I applied for an unpaid internship at an aviation finance firm. Most of my classmates rolled their eyes. "Unpaid, you'll starve," they said, but I didn't care. I was already used to starving. What mattered was opportunity. The office was small, tucked into a glass tower in the city. My first week, I did nothing glamorous, just filed reports, fetched coffee, and sat quietly in meetings. But I listened. I soaked up every word, every strategy, every financial model discussed. Within weeks, I was staying late after everyone left, teaching myself how to analyze aircraft leasing data. I built spreadsheets no one asked for, ran projections no one expected. When my supervisor discovered what I had done, he didn't scold me. He handed me more responsibility. "You have grit," he said. "Most interns give up by week 2. You're still here, and you're hungry." He had no idea how true that was. The sacrifices I lived on the edge of exhaustion. I couch-hopped between friends' apartments, sleeping on futons and in living rooms, carrying my textbooks in a battered duffel bag. Some days I skipped meals to afford bus fare. Other days, I skipped bus fare and walked 3 miles so I could eat a sandwich instead. But every sacrifice felt worth it. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was positioning myself for something greater. When the internship ended, they offered me a junior analyst position. It paid less than most of my classmates' entry-level jobs, but I took it with gratitude. I knew it was the foot in the door I needed. Climbing fast, I worked harder than anyone else in that office. While others clocked out at 5 p.m., I stayed until midnight, running numbers, studying contracts, asking questions no one else thought to ask. My bosses noticed. Within a year, I wasn't just a junior analyst. I was handling deals worth millions. I was sitting across the table from airline executives twice my age, explaining why my projections made more sense than theirs. Some didn't take me seriously. 17-year-old Alyssa, the girl who once cried in a freezing garage, was still inside me, whispering that I didn't belong. But every time I doubted myself, I remembered my parents' voices, telling me I would fail. And I turned that doubt into fire. The leap into business, by the time I was 23, I had saved enough to take a risk. I left the firm and started my own consulting company. Everyone thought I was crazy. "You're too young," they said. "You don't have the connections." They were wrong. I had built relationships quietly, strategically, during those long nights in the office. Airline managers who had once dismissed me now called me for advice. Leasing agents remembered the young woman who worked harder than anyone else, and slowly deals started flowing in. At first, they were small, short-term consulting contracts, helping airlines restructure leases or find financing for used aircraft. But then bigger opportunities arrived. A mid-sized airline in South America needed help negotiating terms on a fleet of regional jets. A cargo operator in Europe wanted financing advice for expansion. I worked nonstop. I barely slept. But for the first time in my life, the exhaustion felt different. It wasn't survival. It was growth. The jet by year 6 of running my company, I looked at my bank account one morning and realized something surreal. Not only had I paid off my debts and built savings, but I could buy something that had once seemed impossible. A jet. A small one. Nothing like the luxury models you see in celebrity magazines. But still, a jet. My jet. Paid in full. No loans, no co-signers. No parents pretending it was theirs. The day I signed the final papers, I sat in the pilot's seat and touched the controls with shaking hands. Tears blurred my vision, because in that moment, I remembered everything. The garage floor, the greasy diner shifts, the skipped meals, the rejection letters, the Mercedes demand. And I thought, this is mine. No one can take this from me. The vow. Renewed as the engines roared to life for the first time, I made another promise to myself. One day, I would fly this jet back to the very town where they had thrown me out. I would land it on the same cracked soil that had once felt like a prison. And when I stepped off the stairs, they would see me, not the ungrateful, selfish girl they discarded, but the woman who built an empire from nothing. And when that day came, I wouldn't need revenge. I would already have won. 11 years after the night I stood on the porch with a suitcase and a voicemail that said, "Don't come back," I returned, not in a borrowed car, not on a bus with a backpack on my shoulder. This time I arrived in my own jet, paid in full. No loans, no help, no family strings attached. When the pilot opened the door, the staircase unfolded into the small regional airport near my hometown. My heels clicked against the steps like punctuation marks at the end of a long sentence. For a moment, the town looked exactly the same. The cracked sidewalks, the rusted road signs, the houses with curtains pulled back just enough for neighbors to watch. But I wasn't the same girl they once whispered about. I hadn't come back for nostalgia. I had come for the fundraiser, the event. The old high school gym had been transformed into an event hall. Gold balloons floated against the ceiling. Folding chairs lined up in rows. Plastic champagne flutes sparkled on tables covered in rented white cloth. At the front of the room, I saw them, my parents, standing proud as though they owned the event. They didn't know who had sponsored it. Not yet. I took a seat in the back while the evening began. The mayor made his speech about saving the community center, about how important it was to invest in the youth. People clapped politely, sipping their cheap champagne, and then the microphone crackled. This entire fundraiser was made possible by the generous support of our special guest, Ms. Alyssa Carrington. For a moment, silence. Then gasps rippled through the room. I stood, smoothing my black jumpsuit, and walked slowly toward the stage. My heels clicked on the polished wood floor, the spotlight trailing me like a long overdue apology. At the front row, my mother's eyes went wide. My father dropped his drink. The speech I reached the stage and took the microphone. The crowd hushed. I grew up in this town, I began, my voice steady. I was told that love was conditional, that if I didn't give everything, I was selfish, that if I refused to sacrifice myself, I would fail. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Then I turned slowly, until my eyes locked on my parents. They were wrong. The silence shattered with thunderous applause. Chairs rattled as people clapped, some even standing. But the only two who didn't move were my parents. Their faces were stone. The confrontation afterward, I stepped down from the stage and made my way through the crowd. Old classmates, teachers, neighbors, they all congratulated me, some with pride, some with thinly disguised shock. Before I could leave, my parents cornered me near the hallway. "Alyssa," my mother said, her voice trembling. "That speech was dramatic," I smiled faintly. "Thanks. It was honest. You embarrassed us," my father snapped. "In front of the whole town." I met his glare without flinching. "You kicked me out at 17 for saying no. You erased me from your lives. And then you asked me to pay for a car I couldn't even sit in. If anyone embarrassed this family, it wasn't me," my mother scoffed. "It was just a Mercedes. It wasn't even new." I blinked slowly. "Do you hear yourself?" For a brief second, her mask slipped. And then she revealed her true agenda. "Look," she said quickly, "we're behind on the house. Your father's pension didn't come through." My dad's voice softened, almost pleading. "We thought maybe now that you're doing well, you could float us a bit." I laughed, not cruelly, not loudly, just sadly. "You made your choice 11 years ago. You chose my sister's comfort over my survival. You laughed when I had nowhere to sleep. You haven't changed. You've just run out of money. We're your parents," my mother whispered. "No," I said calmly. "I was your backup plan, and now I'm your last resort." I walked past them, leaving them standing in that hallway, mouths open, hands empty, the vow renewed that night. As I sat in the back of the car that drove me away from the fundraiser, I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who slept on a cracked air mattress in Brianna's garage. The one who skipped meals, walked miles, and cried herself to sleep. She deserved this moment. She deserved to be heard. She deserved to know that every slammed door, every insult, every tear had led to this. I didn't return for revenge. I returned for respect. And finally, I had it. The House of Cards 3. Days after the fundraiser, my phone buzzed with a notification. Not from my parents. By then, I had blocked every number they used. It was from my lawyer. "The paperwork is ready," the message read. I stared at the screen for a long time, my chest tight. I had been waiting for this moment for months, maybe years. And now, it was here. The secret purchase. 6 months earlier, while reviewing distressed property portfolios for one of my investment arms, I noticed a familiar address. My parents' house. The one I had grown up in. The one where I had been told I was selfish, ungrateful, worthless. The one where I had been shoved out with a suitcase. Their mortgage had slipped into default. Quietly, silently, while they posted pictures of brunches and vacations, the bank had prepared to seize it. I could have ignored it. I could have let the bank take it. But something inside me wanted more than that. Not revenge. Closure. So, through a shell company, I bought it. Cash. No one knew. Not the bank clerk. Not the neighbors. Not my parents. For 6 months, I had waited, letting them live in denial, pretending they still owned it. And now, the time had come. The notice my lawyer, Mr. Lane, drove with me to the property. He was calm, professional, carrying a folder tucked under his arm. "Are you sure you want to do this in person?" he asked. I looked out the window at the peeling paint, the sagging porch swing, the roses my mother once trimmed so carefully. "Yes," I said. "I need to see their faces." When we pulled up, my father was on the porch, cigarette dangling from his lips. My mother came out behind him, folding her arms like a shield. "What do you want?" she snapped. Mr. Lane stepped forward, his voice crisp. "Mr. and Mrs. Carrington, I'm here to serve you with formal notice. You have 30 days to vacate this property." My father laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Vacate? This is our house." "Not anymore," Mr. Lane said evenly. "The deed belongs to Carrington Holdings, LLC, as of 6 months ago." My mother's face drained of color. "What kind of scam is this?" "No scam," I said softly, stepping out from behind Mr. Lane. Their eyes widened. "It's me," I continued. "I own this house now." The reaction. For a moment, silence. The only sound was the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of a lawnmower down the street. Then my father dropped his cigarette, grinding it into the porch boards. His voice was low, dangerous. "You did this?" "Yes." "Why?" My mother whispered, her hands trembling. "Because when I was 17, You taught me that home wasn't free, that love had a price tag. You threw me out when I couldn't pay it, and now I've taken back what you said wasn't mine." Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of rage. "You're punishing us." "No," I corrected her. "I'm protecting myself. The girl you abandoned doesn't owe you comfort anymore. The woman she became owns this house. The argument, you can't do this to us," my father barked. "We built this place." I shook my head. "The bank built your credit. I built my career, and I bought what you couldn't keep. We are your parents," my mother said again, her voice breaking. I met her gaze coldly. "No, you were my wardens, and you lost the keys the night you locked me out. The exit, mister." Lane handed them the papers. "You have 30 days. I suggest you use the time wisely." My father tore the notice in half, then in quarters, scattering it on the porch like confetti. "We're not leaving." "Then the sheriff will make you," Mr. Lane replied calmly. I turned to walk back to the car, but paused. I looked at the house one last time. The chipped paint, the cracked windows, the ghosts of every slammed door and shouted insult. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like justice. The aftermath as we drove away, Mr. Lane studied me. "You don't look satisfied." I exhaled slowly, watching the house shrink in the rearview mirror. Because it's not about satisfaction. It's about symmetry. They shut a door on me once. Now I've shut one on them. That's not revenge. That's balance. Mr. Lane nodded. And balance is powerful. That night, as I poured myself a glass of wine in my city apartment, I thought of the 17-year-old girl who once begged for scraps of approval. She had been told she would fail. Now, she owned the very walls that once rejected her, and soon, those walls would be empty, full circle. The eviction notice wasn't a threat. It was real. 30 days later, their bags were on the lawn, just like mine had been 11 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had thrown me out with nothing. I was giving them 30 days and legal paperwork. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, whispering. My father cursed under his breath, shoving boxes into a rusted pickup truck. My mother stood frozen on the porch, her hands shaking, her face pale. "This house betrayed us," she muttered, but she was wrong. The house hadn't betrayed them. I had simply reclaimed what they thought was theirs. The silence after eviction. For weeks, there was no word. No calls, no emails, no chance encounters. I half expected them to show up at my office, shouting, demanding, begging, but nothing. Until the day of the airport unveiling. The jet and the town. The regional airport had been closed for renovations for months, quietly funded by one of my investment arms. I'd donated half the cost under an alias. Now, the big reveal was here. Cameras flashed as I stepped down the stairs of my jet, dressed in a crisp white suit and dark sunglasses. The applause echoed against the freshly painted hangars. Old classmates, former teachers, the mayor, they were all there, clapping for the girl they once said would never make it. And then, at the edge of the crowd, I saw them. My parents. They looked smaller than I remembered. My father leaned on a borrowed cane, his shoulders slumped. My mother's cardigan sagged like it carried the weight of regret. For the first time in years, they didn't look angry. They looked desperate. The plea I walked past the cameras, past the handshakes, until I stood directly in front of them. "Please," my mother whispered, her voice raw. "We're sorry." I raised an eyebrow. "For what? Kicking me out? Calling me ungrateful? Asking me to pay for a car I couldn't even sit in?" My father coughed, avoiding my eyes. "We thought you'd come around." "I did," I said softly. "Just not the way you expected." My mother reached out, her hand trembling. "We're homeless. We have nowhere to go." I tilted my head. "Then you're still better off than I was at 17. At least you have each other." Her face twisted, half pain, half anger. "You'd really leave your own parents on the street?" I slid a black envelope from my handbag and held it out. Inside was a card, gold lettering, "The Carrington Shelter for Abandoned Youth, opening soon. Fully funded by Alyssa Carrington, in loving memory of second chances." The lesson my mother looked at the card, confused. "What is this?" "There's a room reserved for you," I explained. "Not in the shelter. In the volunteer office." My father's head jerked up. "You want us to work at a homeless shelter?" "No," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "I want you to understand. I want you to feel what it's like to be overlooked, ignored, judged, like you made me feel. Maybe then you'll learn." My mother crumpled the card in her fist, her lip trembling. "You're still bitter." I smiled faintly. "No, bitter people want revenge. Healed people build empires and let karma do the rest." The walk away. I turned, heels clicking against the pavement, and walked back toward the waiting car. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but all I heard was the silence behind me. The silence of two people finally realizing that the daughter they had discarded had become untouchable. Before stepping into the car, I glanced back one last time. "You taught me how to survive," I said quietly, "by making me believe I couldn't. And now, I'm everything you said I'd never be." The driver opened the door, and I slid inside. The final justice. As the car pulled away, the cheers of the crowd rose around me, but I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about the girl I used to be. the girl who once sat alone at a gas station with no phone, no money, and no one who cared. That girl deserved justice, and today, she finally had it, because I wasn't just Alyssa Carrington anymore. I was proof that being kicked out doesn't mean being kept down, and the jet I walked out of, it was just the beginning.